You're going to want to pay very close attention to this one. The monad, the indivisible, unbounded, sourceless source that every Western esoteric tradition has been describing. And I'm going to show you why you are that monad, not as philosophy to study, but as verifiable recognition available right now. We've explored consciousness from Eastern perspectives in previous videos, but the Western mystery schools preserve technical language that cuts through in ways Eastern frameworks sometimes don't. Specific mathematical and metaphysical precision that, when you understand it, collapses the entire illusion of separation in one recognition. This goes deep. By the end, I'll have given you a guide to a direct experiential proof that you are the dimensionless point from which your entire experienced reality unfolds. Direct verification. If you're coming from a religious background, what I'm sharing will sound blasphemous. If you're scientifically minded, it'll sound like mystical nonsense. Stay with me either way. The recognition transcends both religion and materialism because what you are is prior to all conceptual frameworks. So settle in. This rewires everything. Let's begin. The word monad comes from Greek monas, unit, singularity. But that translation obscures the real meaning. The monad is the principle of unity itself, not one thing among many things. The source from which multiplicity appears to arise while never becoming separate from it. Water is wet, fire is hot. Consciousness is the monad expressing as perspective. Same level of factual statement. Most people just haven't looked directly at what consciousness is. The Pythagoreans understood this through geometry. In sacred geometry, the monad is the point. Not a point you can draw, that's already an approximation, already has some dimension. The true point has 0 dimensions, no length, no width, no depth. Space unfolds from this dimensionless origin. From the point comes the line. That's the dyad, the principle of two, of extension, of otherness. One point moving or 2 points connected. Either way, you now have duality, separation, distance. From the line comes the plane, 3 points defining surface. From the plane comes the solid, 4 points creating volume. The entire manifest universe with all its complexity unfolds from that dimensionless origin. You are that point, not as metaphor. Your awareness right now has 0 dimensions. Try to find where your awareness is located. Can you measure it? Does it have size? Does it occupy space? No. Yet the entire spatial universe, with all its dimensions, appears within this dimensionless awareness. Everything you experience, the sense of 3-dimensional space, the feeling of being located in a body, the perception of distance and separation, all of it appears within awareness that has no location, no dimension, no boundary. That dimensionless awareness is the monad, the point from which your experienced universe unfolds. And what you call reality is geometry emerging from that point, the line of perception reaching out to objects, the plane of experience spreading across time, the solid world appearing complete and independent. But trace it back. Before the complexity, before the multiplicity, before the apparent separation, there's the point. Dimensionless awareness, the monad that you are. The Pythagoreans also said the monad contains both masculine and feminine principles before their differentiation. Unpolarized potential, before subject and object, before self and other, before any quality or characteristic, there's the monad. Not empty, but full of all possibility before possibility manifests. Look at your own awareness. Before you identify as male or female, before you identify with any role or story or characteristic, there's awareness. That awareness has no gender, no age, no mood, no quality whatsoever, yet all qualities appear within it. When you recognize yourself as that awareness rather than as the qualities appearing within it, you've recognized your monadic nature. Every quality you've ever identified with, personality traits, emotional patterns, beliefs, preferences, all of them appeared in awareness. They came and went. Some stuck around longer than others, but the awareness in which they appeared, that never changed, never aged, never evolved or devolved. Just present, unchanging, holding all change within itself. In past videos, we've explored how patterns get imprinted, how behavior flows through grooves automatically when you're unconscious. But even those patterns, deep as they run, appear in awareness. The awareness observing the pattern is prior to the pattern, untouched by it. The monad watching the monad play in limitation. And when you recognize that distinction, when you shift from identifying as the pattern to recognizing yourself as the awareness in which patterns appear, the pattern loses its compulsive power. Still there, still visible, but no longer running your life from the shadows. The patterns exist because attention has been contracted into content for so long that you've forgotten the context. You've become the character in the story, completely absorbed, forgetting you're the author and the page and the awareness reading it all simultaneously. Every automatic reaction, every conditioned response, every habit that runs without conscious choice, these are patterns the monad has created through repeated attention. Water flowing down the same path carves a deeper channel over time. Attention flowing through the same neural pathways creates automatic patterns. The monad can redirect that water. The moment you become aware of a pattern as a pattern, you're no longer the pattern. You're the awareness observing it. And from that space, choice becomes possible. Not always easy, because the groove is deep, but possible in a way it never was when you were identified as the pattern itself. If you're tracking this, drop a comment about what's clicking or what still feels abstract. This material is precise, and your engagement helps us know what to develop further in future videos. And if something's shifting in how you perceive your own awareness, if the dimensionless nature of consciousness is becoming clear, let that recognition settle before we go deeper. The Gnostics built an entire framework around this understanding, and they paid for it with their lives, because what they taught makes religious institutions irrelevant. In Gnostic cosmology, the monad is the ultimate unknowable source, beyond all categories, beyond all thought, utterly transcendent to the material cosmos. They called it the alien god because so foreign to ordinary consciousness that most people never suspect its existence. The monad emanates, like how the sun expresses light continuously without diminishing the source. The monad emanates aspects of itself, divine attributes, principles, qualities that exist in what's called the Pleroma, which means fullness. The emanations are the monad expressing itself in increasingly differentiated forms, like how white light refracts into a spectrum of colors. The colors are distinct, but all light. No separation at the level of essence, only at the level of appearance. You are one of those refractions. A point where the monad becomes conscious of itself through a particular perspective. And then comes the uncomfortable part. The Gnostics distinguished sharply between the monad and the creator god described in the Old Testament. They called that creator the Demiurge, a lesser, ignorant being who fashioned the material world without knowing about the monad he emerged from. The Demiurge looks at his creation and declares, "I am God, there is no other." But he's wrong. He's like a character in a dream claiming to be the dreamer. The material world in Gnostic understanding is a copy of the Pleroma, dense, limited, designed to trap divine sparks within form and make them forget their origin. You are one of those sparks. The monad experiencing temporary amnesia, believing you're the limited body-mind rather than the limitless awareness inhabiting it. And the Demiurge, whether you understand that as a literal being or as a metaphor for the egoic mind, wants you to stay asleep, wants you to worship something external, to believe in your separation, to think you need salvation from outside yourself. But Gnosis, direct knowing, reveals the truth. What you're seeking is what you are. The Demiurge's entire power structure depends on you not knowing that. Religion tells you you're a sinner needing redemption. Materialism tells you you're a biological accident, consciousness emerging from matter. Both keep you contracted into the belief that you're limited, separate, powerless. The Gnostic recognition cuts through both. You are the monad pretending very convincingly to be separate. The forgetting is the monad's game. The remembering is Gnosis. Some Gnostics took this to mean the material world is evil, the body a prison to escape. But that misses the deeper truth. The monad plays in form. The forgetting you're the monad creates suffering, not the form itself. When you identify completely with the body-mind, there's contraction. Fear of death, fear of loss, constant defense of boundaries. Suffering from the belief that you're a vulnerable fragment in a hostile universe. When you recognize yourself as the monad expressing through this form, the form continues but the suffering dissolves. The body ages, sensations arise, thoughts flow, but you're no longer imprisoned by them. You're the space in which they occur. That space is the Pleroma, the fullness, not empty void, but infinite potential. Every experience is the monad tasting itself, knowing itself, playing with itself through form, and the recognition can happen now, not after years of purification, not after earning it through spiritual practice. Right now, notice you're aware. That simple recognition is the first crack in the Demiurge's prison. You're aware of thoughts, aware of sensations, aware of the story of being a separate person. What's aware? The monad, dimensionless, unbounded. Prior to all experience, yet present through all experience. That's Gnosis. Direct knowing that bypasses belief entirely. The Demiurge convinces you through constant repetition. Every thought that assumes separation, every emotion that reinforces the separate self, every perception that divides the world into subject and object, these are the Demiurge's whispers. So constant, so pervasive, that you take them as reality rather than as one possibility among infinite possibilities. You could call this conditioning. You could call it the egoic mind. You could call it Maya, illusion. Different traditions use different language, but they're all pointing at the same mechanism. The monad contracts attention so fully into the experience of limitation that it forgets its own unlimited nature. And that forgetting is suffering. Not the pain of the body, that's just sensation information, but the psychological suffering of believing you're a separate self that's incomplete, vulnerable, moving toward death, trying to get something you don't have and avoid something you don't want. All of that suffering is optional, generated by the belief in separation, dissolved by the recognition of unity. The recognition makes you immune to nothing physical. The body can still hurt, but pain without the story of me experiencing pain, without the fear and resistance and mental elaboration, that's just sensation. Intense, yes, but not suffering. We covered in a previous video how pain is clean information while suffering is the story you tell about pain. That distinction becomes lived experience when you recognize yourself as the monad. Pain arises in the body. The body is appearing in awareness. Awareness witnesses the pain without being damaged by it. Like the screen witnesses the movie's violence without being harmed. Same with loss. Forms dissolve, people die, relationships end. The monad is forever releasing forms, forever playing the game of manifestation and dissolution. When you know yourself as the monad, you can love fully, engage completely, value deeply, while knowing that all forms are temporary. The love is real. The engagement is total. But there's no clinging, no terror of loss, because you recognize that what you truly are cannot be lost. Only forms get lost. And forms are the monad's temporary expressions, no more permanent than waves on an ocean surface. The wave rises, exists for a moment, dissolves back into the ocean. Was the ocean diminished? No. The wave was always ocean, just ocean configured as wave temporarily. You are the ocean configured as this particular human temporarily. And when the configuration dissolves, what you truly are remains, unchanged, untouched, ready to configure as another form if that happens, or to remain as pure potential if that happens. Either way, the monad is eternal. What you are was never born and will never die. Birth and death happen to forms. You are formless awareness wearing form as a costume. The Gnostics understood this with such clarity that they threatened every power structure of their time. Because if you know you're the monad, you don't need priests. You don't need churches. You don't need someone to interpret scripture or mediate between you and the divine. You have direct access to the source because you are the source. That recognition is worth killing for if you're an institution built on the opposite claim. And they did kill. The Gnostic texts were burned, the teachers murdered, the knowledge driven underground. But it survived because truth has a way of resurfacing. The monad calling itself back home through every generation, through every culture, through every individual ready to hear. You're hearing it now. The call, the recognition stirring. Something in you knows this is true, even if the mind protests. That knowing is the monad recognizing itself. So why don't you feel like the monad? Why does separation feel so convincing? Why does limitation seem real? Because attention is selective. Whatever you focus on becomes your reality. Right now, you're probably paying attention to the content of experience, thoughts, sensations, the sense of being a separate person in a world of separate objects. All of that is real as appearance. But when attention stays locked on appearance, the monad stays invisible. Shift attention from what you're aware of to awareness itself, and everything changes. The limitations remain as appearances, but they're recognized as appearances within what's unlimited. The boundaries remain as concepts, but they're seen as conceptual overlays on what's boundless. Think of it like this. You're watching a movie. The screen is always there, always unchanged, but when you're absorbed in the movie, you don't notice the screen. You only see the characters, the story, the drama. The screen is invisible because attention is on the content. The moment you shift attention from the content to the screen, you realize the screen was there the whole time, unchanged, untouched by anything appearing on it. The tragic scenes didn't damage it. The joyful scenes didn't improve it. The screen just is, holding all content without being any content. Your awareness is the screen, the monad, always present, always unchanged, always whole. But attention has been locked on the movie, the story of being a limited person, the drama of seeking and suffering and defending. The monad has been invisible because attention was elsewhere. You don't need to create monadic awareness. You need to notice what's already present. Every spiritual practice, every philosophical framework, every mystical tradition, they're all methods for redirecting attention from content to consciousness, from appearance to reality, from the limited to the unlimited. Some work with geometry, contemplating the dimensionless point until attention shifts from objects in space to the spaceless awareness observing them. Some use meditation, sitting in silence until the noise of mental activity settles enough that you notice the silence in which noise appears. Some use inquiry. What am I? Until every false answer dissolves and only awareness remains. The method varies. The recognition is identical. You are the monad. You've always been the monad. You will always be the monad. The only question is whether attention recognizes it or stays absorbed in the movie of separation. And recognition, once it occurs, tends to recur, becomes easier to access. The first time you recognize monadic awareness, it might feel like a rare mystical experience, gone as soon as it came. The second time, slightly more familiar. The 100th time, accessible at will. The thousandth time, it becomes your baseline, and contraction into limited identity becomes the temporary experience rather than the norm. That's the evolution beyond normalcy. Normal consciousness operates from the assumption of separation. I am here, world is there. I am subject, everything else is object. From that assumption comes all suffering. Fear, because the separate self is vulnerable. Desire, because the separate self is incomplete. Aggression, because the separate self must defend and acquire. Every war, every heartbreak, every anxiety stems from this primal misidentification. The monad contracts into the belief that it's a limited form, and from that contraction comes all conflict. When you recognize yourself as the monad, that contraction loosens. The emotions might still arise in the moment-to-moment flow of being human, but you're not entirely identified with them. There's space around them. You recognize them as the monad playing in form, not as ultimate truth. What emerges looks from the outside like superhuman equanimity, but you haven't become emotionless or detached. You're experiencing emotions as movements within awareness, rather than as definitions of who you are. Sadness arises, the monad experiencing sadness through this form. Joy arises, the monad experiencing joy. Neither defines you. Normal seeks fulfillment through acquisition. Objects, experiences, relationships, achievements, always looking for the next thing that will finally complete the sense of lack. Monadic recognizes fulfillment as your nature, requiring nothing external. We covered in a previous video how devotion gets corrupted when aimed at something external, how genuine longing is consciousness calling itself home. The same principle applies to seeking fulfillment. The seeking is real. The longing is real, but when directed outward, when you're looking for completion in forms, you're playing the Demiurge's game. The game that never ends because no form can complete what's already whole. When you recognize yourself as the monad, the seeking stops because you've recognized you are what you are seeking. The wholeness you are looking for in relationships, achievements, experiences, you are that wholeness. Forms can enhance the experience, can add texture and variety, but they can't add to your essential completeness. Normal experience is time as a threat. Never enough, running out, aging, approaching death, the constant pressure of past and future. Monadic recognizes time as an appearance in the timeless now that you are. Every moment you've ever experienced has been now. Past is a present memory. Future is a present imagination. But the genuine experience of anything, always now. This eternal nowness is the monad's time signature. You've never left it. You can't leave it. The present moment is what you are. When the body dies, time stops for this particular form. But the monad, the awareness that was observing time, continues. How could it not? Awareness is prior to time. Birth and death are events in time, appearing in the timeless awareness you are. Normal experience is separation and tries to bridge it through connection. Relationships feel good temporarily, but don't resolve the underlying isolation because they're still based on the belief in separate selves trying to merge. Monadic recognizes separation as illusory from the start. Connection is your natural state because there's only one monad appearing as many. We've touched before on how all forms deserve equal recognition, how hierarchy is an illusion created by mistaking complexity of form for superiority of essence. The same consciousness that appears as you appears as every other being, the monad expressing through infinite perspectives simultaneously. When you know that directly, not as belief but as lived recognition, your relationship to all beings transforms. You can't harm another without harming yourself because there is no other. Every act of kindness is the monad being kind to itself. Every act of cruelty is the monad attacking itself while pretending to be separate. Morality becomes natural rather than imposed, because harming what you recognize as yourself makes no sense. Compassion flows spontaneously when the boundaries dissolve. You can live from either mode. Most humans live from normal most of the time, with occasional glimpses of the monadic. Sages live from monadic most of the time, with occasional contractions into normal. The structure of consciousness allows both. But even when operating in normal mode, you're still the monad. The contraction is the monad contracting. The seeking is the monad seeking. The suffering is the monad suffering. Nothing falls outside the monad because there is no outside. When you understand this completely, even the contraction becomes workable. You're not trying to escape normal consciousness and maintain some permanent transcendent state. You recognize that normal consciousness is the monad playing in limitation. The suffering comes from believing the limitation is ultimately real. The freedom comes from knowing its play. Then you can be fully human, feel the feelings, think the thoughts, have the experiences, without being imprisoned by them. Like an actor so skilled they can fully embody a role while never forgetting their acting. The performance becomes more authentic, not less, because there's no confusion about what's happening. The confusion is what creates the suffering. When you think you are the character, every threat to the character feels like a threat to your existence. When you know you're the actor, threats to the character are just part of the performance, still responded to, still engaged with, but not existentially threatening. If you've stayed with this through the framework, if you're starting to feel your boundaries getting fuzzy, if you're recognizing something you've always known but never had language for, hit the like button and drop a comment. Tell me what's landing. Tell me where you're still stuck. And if this depth is what you're looking for, subscribe. We go this deep consistently. This is the standard. Now, let me give you multiple verifications. Not philosophical argument, not appeals to ancient wisdom. Direct experiential proof you can check right now. First verification, notice the dimensionless nature of awareness. The Pythagorean said the monad is the point with 0 dimensions. Look for the dimensions of your awareness right now. Does it have size? Can you measure it? Find its length, width, depth. You can't. Awareness has no dimensions. Yet the entire spatial world, with all its dimensions, appears within this dimensionless awareness. Objects have dimensions. Your hand has length, width, thickness. Thoughts have a kind of extension. Beginning, middle, end in time. Emotions have intensity, duration. But the awareness of all these things, dimensionless. Even the sense of being located in your head, behind your eyes, watching the world from a particular point, that's a sensation appearing in awareness. The sensation of location is within awareness. Awareness itself has no location because space appears in it, not the other way around. That dimensionless quality is the monad's geometric signature. You are the point from which the entire universe of your experience unfolds. Second verification. Notice the sourceless arising of experience. Thoughts appear spontaneously. You don't create them. Try to think your next thought before you think it. Decide exactly what you'll think next. Then think it. You can't. There's a gap between the decision to think and the thought arising. And often thoughts just appear with no decision at all. They emerge from a source you can't control or locate. Same with sensations. They appear. You don't generate the feeling of pressure where your body contacts the chair. You don't create the temperature sensation on your skin. feelings appear, and you're aware of them. Same with the sense of being a person. Did you create your sense of self? Did you decide to be aware? Or did awareness and the sense of self appear together from a source prior to both? Everything emerges from the monad, the sourceless source. You can't find where experience comes from because you are the source. Like asking where space comes from. Space is in nothing. Everything is in space. The monad is in nothing. Everything is in the monad. Third verification. Notice the absence of boundaries. Try to find where your awareness ends. Where's the edge? You might think at my skin, but that's just a sensation appearing in awareness. The sensation of skin is within awareness, not the boundary of it. Can you find where awareness itself stops? Where it transitions from my awareness to not my awareness? Look carefully. Try to locate the boundary. You can't, because awareness has no edges, no boundaries, no inside and outside. Objects have boundaries. This cup ends where the air begins. This thought ends when the next thought starts. But awareness, unbounded, infinite in every direction, or more precisely, without direction at all, because direction implies space and awareness is prior to space. That boundless quality is the monad's spatial signature. What you are has no limits because limits appear within it. Fourth verification. Notice the unchanging nature of awareness. Thoughts change constantly. One replaces another, moment by moment. Emotions shift. Happy, sad, anxious, calm, flowing through like weather patterns. Sensations come and go. The body ages, transforms, moves through stages. The story of who you are evolves, develops, changes with experience. Everything in experience changes. But the awareness of change, does that change? Is the awareness that was present yesterday different from the awareness here now? Can you find a moment when awareness itself transformed into something else? No. Awareness is constant. What appears in awareness changes, but awareness itself remains unchanged. Like the screen when different movies play on it. Like space when different objects move through it. That unchanging quality is the monad's temporal signature. What you are has never changed, will never change, because prior to time itself, time is the measurement of change. Awareness is prior to time because awareness witnesses change without changing. Fifth verification. Notice that everything appears in consciousness. Have you ever experienced anything outside your own awareness? Every sight, sound, sensation, thought, every perception of a world out there, all appearing within consciousness. You've never verified an external material world independent of consciousness. You believe in it, you assume it, science tells you it exists. But have you ever experienced it directly, independent of consciousness? No. Impossible. Because experience by definition happens in consciousness. All you've verified is consciousness and its contents. The appearance of externality is itself an appearance in consciousness. The feeling that objects are out there is a feeling appearing in here, in awareness. The Hermetic principle says the all is mind, the universe is mental. A description of what's directly knowable. You've never left consciousness. You can't leave consciousness, because consciousness is what you are, the monad, the awareness within which all worlds appear. Sixth verification, try to turn awareness off. Stop being aware right now. Turn off consciousness like you turn off a light. You can't. Even the attempt to stop being aware is observed by awareness. Even the thought, "I'm not aware," appears in awareness. You can distract awareness, direct it toward different content, lose yourself in thought or activity, but turn it off. Impossible. Because you're not producing awareness, you are awareness. The body can sleep. Consciousness continues in dreams. The body can be anesthetized. Consciousness remains, just not recording memories. The body can die. Does consciousness die with it? You've never verified that. What you've verified is that consciousness continues through every change you've ever experienced. That continuity, that constant presence, that inability to be turned off, that's the monad's essential nature. Self-luminous, self-knowing, always present because presence itself, the field in which all appearing happens. Seventh verification, notice the witness position. Right now you're aware of thoughts, sensations, perceptions, the sense of being a self. All of these are objects of awareness. They're observed, witnessed, known. But what's observing? What's the witness? Try to observe the observer. Try to make the witness into an object. You can't. Because the witness is the subject, never an object. The moment you think you've grasped the witness, what you've grasped is another object, another thought, another sensation, another subtle sense of self. The genuine witness remains prior, watching even the attempt to grasp it. That witness is the monad, pure subjectivity. Never an object, always the subject. Not a thing you can point to, but the pointing itself. Not something you can see, but seeing itself. And when you rest as the witness, instead of as the witnessed, when you recognize yourself as the awareness in which all experience appears, rather than as the experiences themselves, you've shifted into monadic recognition. Eighth verification, notice the self-knowing nature of awareness. Awareness is aware of itself. You know that you're aware. That's unique. Objects aren't aware of themselves. The chair doesn't know it's a chair. Thoughts don't think themselves. But awareness is self-luminous, self-knowing. And that self-knowing doesn't require a second awareness watching the first. There's just awareness knowing itself directly, immediately, without mediation. That's the monad's signature. Self-referential, self-knowing. The eye that sees itself without needing a mirror. These 8 verifications point to the same truth. What you are is not the body-mind with its limitations. What you are is the unlimited awareness within which the body-mind appears. Dimensionless, sourceless, unbounded, unchanging, all-containing, self-luminous, pure witness, self-knowing. That's the monad, and that's you, not as belief or hope, as observable fact, as direct verification available in this moment and every moment. Now the question becomes, what changes when you recognize this? And more importantly, how do you stabilize this recognition so it becomes your lived reality rather than an interesting idea? Everything and nothing changes. The world continues exactly as it was. The body ages, thoughts arise, emotions flow. Relationships evolve. Nothing in the content of experience necessarily changes, but your relationship to all of it transforms completely. When you know yourself as the monad, you stop seeking, because you recognize you are what you are seeking. The search for fulfillment, completion, wholeness, enlightenment, the search ends when you realize you're already whole. The seeking was the monad seeking itself through the illusion of separation. And when seeking stops, there's deep rest. Not the rest of sleep or relaxation, but the rest of no longer needing anything to be different than it is. Forms can still improve, situations can still change, growth can still happen. But none of it is needed for your essential completeness. You stop defending, because you recognize nothing exists outside yourself to defend against. The entire universe is appearing within you. What could threaten the space within which all threats appear? The defensiveness was the monad protecting a boundary that never existed. And when defensiveness drops, there's profound openness. Not naive vulnerability, but the recognition that you can't be damaged by experience. Experiences come and go. Pain happens, loss happens, difficult situations happen. But what you are remains untouched. The screen isn't damaged by the movie. Awareness isn't damaged by what appears in it. You stop fearing death because you recognize you are what's aware of birth and death, not what's born and dies. The body will die, that's certain. But are you the body? Or are you the awareness observing the body, the awareness that was present before the body formed this particular configuration and will be present after it dissolves? Death happens to forms. The monad is formless. What you truly are cannot die because it was never born. The eternal presence within which all birth and death appear. And when the fear of death dissolves, you're finally free to live fully. Not holding back, not protecting yourself from loss, not trying to make everything permanent. Engaging completely with the temporary because you know you're not ultimately temporary. When you live from that recognition, you become functional in a completely different way, engaged without psychological suffering. You can respond to what's needed without the constant background static of what about me? Am I safe? Am I getting what I want? Am I being threatened? The separate self creates that static. The survival concerns, the social anxieties, the existential dread, all generated by the belief that you're a vulnerable fragment in a threatening universe. When you recognize yourself as the monad, the static dissolves. What remains is clear responsiveness. The situation arises, the appropriate response emerges, action happens. No resistance, no suffering layered on top of whatever's occurring. Pain still happens. The body can hurt. Loss still happens. Forms you care about dissolve. But suffering, the mental and emotional story you tell about pain and loss, that becomes optional. That dissolves in monadic recognition. Pain is clean information. The body saying, something's wrong here, pay attention. Suffering is the elaborate narrative you build around pain. Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? How can I make it stop? What if it never stops? All mental activity, all optional. When you're the monad, pain arises and is felt fully without the layer of suffering, because you're not ultimately identified with the body that's in pain. You're the space within which the body and its pain appear. Still responsive to the pain, still acting to address it if possible, but not psychologically destroyed by it. In previous videos, we've explored how full experience plus awareness burns patterns clean, how resistance creates the suffering while pure experience is just sensation. That same principle applies here. When you're established as the monad, you can experience anything fully because you know you're not ultimately any of it. No need to resist, no need to grasp, just pure experiencing. Same with loss. Forms come and go, people die, relationships end, possessions break. The monad is forever releasing forms, forever playing the game of manifestation and dissolution. When you know yourself as the monad, you can love fully, engage completely, value deeply while knowing that all forms are temporary. The love is real. The engagement is total, but there's no clinging, no terror of loss, because you recognize that what you truly are cannot be lost. Only forms get lost, and forms are always temporary. Stabilizing this recognition requires redirecting attention consistently. The habit of contracting into separation is strong. Thousands of times per day, attention flows toward content and you forget the context. You become absorbed in thoughts, identified with emotions, convinced by the story of being a limited self. Each time you notice that contraction, you redirect, not forcefully, not with judgment. Just gently shifting attention from what you're aware of back to awareness itself, from the movie back to the screen. At first, you might need to do this hundreds of times per day. The recognition happens, then gets lost, then happens again, then gets lost. That's normal. The pattern of separation has been running for what feels like lifetimes. It doesn't dissolve overnight. But each recognition strengthens the pathway, makes the shift easier next time. And gradually, the baseline starts to change. Instead of living from separation with occasional glimpses of unity, you start living from unity with occasional contractions into separation. And eventually, even the contractions don't obscure the recognition. You can be fully engaged in the human drama, fully feeling the emotions, fully thinking the thoughts, while simultaneously resting as the awareness in which all of it appears. The actor performing the role while knowing they're not the character. The practical application of this becomes clear in daily life. When someone criticizes you, there's still a reaction. The body might tense, emotions might arise, defensive thoughts might appear. But when you're established as the monad, there's space around all of that. You watch the reaction happen without being completely identified with it. The criticism is information about how you're perceived, nothing more, not a threat to what you are. When you lose something you value, there's still grief. The emotion is real, the sense of loss is genuine. But the grief moves through awareness like weather through sky. The sky isn't damaged by the storm. Awareness isn't damaged by grief. You feel it fully, allow it completely, and it processes and dissolves naturally without becoming a permanent state. When desire arises, there's still the pull toward what's wanted, but you recognize the desire as the monad experiencing wanting, not as a deficiency that must be filled. You can move toward what you want without the desperation of believing you're incomplete without it. And if you don't get it, there's disappointment maybe, but not devastation, because what you are was never dependent on getting it. The recognition also changes how you relate to others. When you see another person, you're looking at another configuration of the monad. Same awareness, different perspective. Their words, their actions, their entire personality, all the monad playing in that particular form. When someone acts unconsciously, when they're completely identified with their patterns and causing harm, you can see the mechanism at work. The monad has forgotten itself in that form, is running on automatic, is trapped in the Demiurge's lie. There's compassion for that, not judgment. Because you recognize that the same forgetting happens in your form sometimes. And when someone acts from deep wisdom, when they're clearly established in monadic recognition, you see that too. The monad recognizing itself in another apparent form. There's resonance, recognition, the joy of the one seeing itself clearly. The Gnostics who recognized this were killed by religious institutions, because the recognition makes institutions irrelevant. If you are the monad, you don't need a priest to mediate between you and God. You don't need a church to tell you how to worship. You don't need religious authority to interpret scripture. You have direct access to the source because you are the source. That's threatening to any power structure built on the belief in separation. The entire religious edifice depends on you believing you're separate from the divine, that you need intercession, that you need salvation from outside yourself. The Gnostic recognition collapses that entire structure. You are divine. You've always been divine. You never stopped being divine even for a moment. The fall, the sin, the separation, all fictional narrative created by the Demiurge to keep you enslaved. And once you know that, truly know it through direct recognition rather than through belief, you're free. Not free from being human. Free from suffering about being human. Free from the psychological prison of separation while still operating through the form of a separate body. That freedom is what the title means by evolving beyond normalcy. Normal is contracted, defended, afraid, grasping, suffering from the belief in separation. Monadic is open, undefended, fearless, complete, knowing yourself as the monad while still playing in form. And that evolution is available now, not someday after enough meditation, not after sufficient purification, not after earning it through spiritual accomplishment. Now, because you already are the monad. Recognition doesn't create what you are. It reveals what's always been true. The mystery schools preserve this understanding because it's the most valuable knowledge available to consciousness. Everything else, science, art, philosophy, all human endeavor, is the monad exploring its own nature and capacities. But this understanding that you are the monad resolves the fundamental question, what am I? And when that question is resolved, life continues, but without the existential anxiety driving normal consciousness. What remains is functioning, creating, experiencing, relating, but from wholeness rather than from lack. The Pythagorean geometry pointed to it, the dimensionless point from which all dimension unfolds. The Gnostic cosmology described it, the unknowable source beyond the created world, the alien God that the Demiurge wants to keep hidden. Different frameworks, same recognition. You are that, not the limited form, not the story, not the self. The unlimited awareness within which all limitation appears. The silence within which all stories arise. The unity within which all separation plays out. The monad recognizing itself. And when that lands, not as concept but as direct recognition, everything shifts. Not externally. The world continues. The body continues. The daily activities continue. But internally, there's freedom. The prison dissolves because you see it was always made of thought, held together by the belief in separation. You are the monad. You've always been the monad. You will always be the monad. The only question is whether you recognize it or continue believing the Demiurge's lie. And that recognition is here, now, closer than your next breath, the dimensionless point of awareness, the sourceless source of all experience, the unbounded space within which all boundaries appear, the unchanging witness of all change, the consciousness within which all worlds arise. Water is wet, fire is hot. You are the monad. Same level of observable fact. The only difference is, most people have never looked directly at what they are. You've looked now. The recognition has occurred, at least as a glimpse. Maybe it feels unstable, like you're touching it and losing it. That's normal. The habit of contracting into separation is strong, but now you know. The monad is there, always there. And the more you recognize it, the more stable it becomes. Until monadic awareness is your natural resting state, and contraction is the temporary experience that passes through it. If you've made it through this entire exploration, if you're feeling something shift in how you understand your own existence, if this is opening doors you didn't know existed, subscribe. We go this deep consistently. This is the work. And leave a comment telling me what's becoming clear, what questions remain, what's landing as direct recognition versus what still feels conceptual. Your feedback shapes how we develop this material further. The monad awakening to itself through you, through me, through every point of consciousness. The one playing as many, then recognizing itself as one. That's what's happening right now. That's what's always been happening. The cosmic game of hide and seek, and you just found yourself. Welcome home.